So today I'm going to show you how to replace a top end in a 2021 KX450. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the seat and the plastic so we can get to the top end. So on the KX, the fuel pump, you want to, I don't know if you can see in there real good, but there's a black connector right here on the side, the left side of your frame. You want to disconnect that first. So the next thing you're going to want to do is get a small flathead screwdriver like this, and then we're going to take this little clip for your fuel line and pop it out. Just like, you can see that real well, but pop this out so that way we can get to the fuel line and disconnect it from the gas tank. Okay, now that we got the gas tank off, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the back end and we're going to remove the rear exhaust and the whole subframe and air box. That way we can get to the throttle body and get that removed, because we're going to need that out of the way to be able to remove the cylinder and head. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the battery bracket and the battery, and then we're going to remove all the wiring that connects to the rear end here. So your starter relay and everything is just going to slide up off there, and then we're going to kind of tuck everything out of the way so that we can get the rest of the subframe off. So the next thing I did is I put the bike on a stand, and we're going to remove the rear shock so it's easier to get to the throttle body and get the throttle body out of the way of the cylinder. And then after that, we'll drain the antifreeze. Okay, so now we're going to drain the antifreeze. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove this little bracket right here that protects your motor. And then this bolt right here is your antifreeze drain. So remember to remove your cap first, because it's going to let the antifreeze come out of there. And if it's not coming out fast enough and you open that afterwards, it's going to blow everywhere on you. So remember to remove that first. So the next thing I'm going to do before I remove the radiators is I'm going to take the exhaust off. That way I can get to the hoses a little bit easier. Okay, so next I'm going to remove the radiators and the hoses. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the motor mounts and all the electrical stuff on the top of the motor, like the spark plug and the connectors and everything like that. So here we go. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the valve cover, and then we're going to take off our sight glasses here, and we're going to get the motor to top dead center, and I'll show you what the cams look like when the bike is at top dead center, and that's how we're going to set our timing later on. Okay, so once we remove these sight glasses right here, what we can do is we're going to get a 17mm socket on our ratchet, and then we're going to turn the motor over until it's at top dead center. And you will be able to see, so there's two, I don't know if you guys can see them, I'm trying to use this light to help you, but so there is right here, there's a dot, and then right over here, there's another dot. You want those dots to be lined up perfectly level with the top of the cam plate right here. So we're going to turn the motor over until we get to there. Let's keep going over it one more time. All right, so we are basically lined up right there. Now, in here, I'm sure you're not going to be able to see it, but there is a small little line right in there on the stator. And you want that line to line up with this mark on the outside of this sight glass right here. There's a little line. You want it to line up. So that way, when we're going to put the top end back together, we know that we're at top dead center when that mark is lined up with that line, and we can line the camshafts back up. But a trick that I like to do, if you're not replacing the cam chain, what you can do is mark the little dot right here up with this part on the cam chain. So we'll line that up, and then over here we'll line this dot up with that one. And that'll tell us that we're at top dead center and that we're lined up when we go to put it back together. You can only do that if you're not replacing the cam chain, because obviously you're not going to have a mark on the new cam chain. But that's a little trick. So next I'm going to use an 8mm and I'm going to remove the cam cover so that I can take the cam off. I'm also going to take out the cam chain tensioner so that we can get the cam chain off and get the cams out. Okay, so now we have all our bolts loosened up for the top of the cam chain holder so that you don't mess up the mating service between the cam chain holder and the head. I like to put a screwdriver in here and kind of just shake that up, and it'll help get that released so that you have a gap there so you can get that off now. All right, so we have the cam chain or the cam holder off. Now we can pull our cam out and remove the cam chain. So there's little keepers right here. Pull one out so you can see it. These little keepers that hold the cam in place. Make sure that you don't lose those and drop them into the motor. That'll just be a big pain in the butt and you'll have to fish them out of there. Okay, so now we're going to remove our 4 head bolts that hold the head and the cylinder on. One here, here, and then the 2 on the outside. They're 12mm, and we're going to remove those. All right, so now that we've got those all loosened up, you can take out your cylinder head studs. Now they have washers on the bottom of them, so make sure that you pull the washer off also, and the ones in the head, make sure you don't drop them down in the head while you're removing it. Okay, so there's 2 more bolts that we have to remove before we can take the head off. There's an Allen head here, and then there's one down in this groove in the cylinder head. So we gotta loosen those so that we can get the head off. All right, so now that we got the 2 bolts out, the Allen bolts, now we can remove the head and pull it out of the bike. Okay, now we're down to this part where we've got our head gasket, and you can see this piston is at almost top dead center. Probably moved a little bit while we were removing everything, but now we're going to pull the cylinder off so we can expose the piston. Okay, so now we have the cylinder off and we have the piston exposed. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put some rags down into the bottom here below the piston so that when we take the C-clip off the piston, it doesn't fall into the motor and get lost, because we do not want it down there. So that's what we'll do next. All right, now that we have the rags down in there, there's the C-clip, and we're going to put a little pick in there and pry out that C-clip. Now, I only have 2 hands, so I won't be able to hold the camera to show you how to do this, but there's a little divot in the piston that gives you access to get underneath the clip. So that's where we're going to put our little pin and try and pull it out. All right, that one came out really easy. So now we're going to push the pin through and pull it out this side. Sometimes these are a little tough to get out of there, but there we go. This one seems to not be too tough, so we pull the piston off and tuck these rags back down in there so we can put the new piston on. Okay, so we want to put one of the clips in before we put the piston back in the bike. It'll make it a little easier to get a clip in when you've got the piston out. So the easiest side for me to get to while the piston's in the bike is the right side of the piston. So we'll go ahead and put the left side C-clip in first. That way it's in there when we go to put the other one back in it when the piston's on the bike. So they're a little tough to get in there, and they're supposed to be so that they don't pop out while your motor's revving. So you want to put it partially in there and then kind of pry around just a little bit with a screwdriver. And then once it's in there, kind of work it into place. So there you go. It's in place now. Next, we're going to start putting the wrist pin in, and I always put just a little bit of assembly lube on there just to help it slide into the piston. You don't need a lot, but just a little bit. And rub that around the outside of the wrist, or the wrist pin. And then we'll just start it into the piston. Don't push it all the way through because we're going to need to put this onto the crank. Okay, next important tip. This piston says exhaust on the front of it, but there's sometimes a dot, sometimes there's an arrow on one side of the piston. Wherever that dot or that arrow is going to the exhaust side. So usually it's to the front of the bike, but if you're doing a Yamaha, you have to pay attention because they have a reversed motor. So the piston will actually go, the arrow will go back. It just goes to the exhaust side. So make sure you line that up when you put the piston in. All right, so now we got our piston on there, and we want to slide the wrist pin through the connecting rod so that it's all the way in and we can get that next clip in there. Remember to keep your rags there so that you don't lose that next clip down into the motor by accident. Okay, so that next clip is in there now, and I pulled out the rags, so the next thing we're going to do is put on the base gasket. All right, so if you're trying to figure out which one's the base gasket and which one's the head gasket, because they look very similar, the head gasket is going to be your thicker one that usually has like 3 gaskets kind of all stuck together, and the base gasket is just going to be one sheet of metal like that. Sometimes they're paper. This bike uses a metal base gasket and metal head gasket. All right, so next we've got our rings. This is going to be our compression ring. It's the one thick ring, and this is going to be our oil scraper rings. So the easiest way to get these on is to put your oil scraper, which is this one. You want to put that one on first, and then put the 2 smaller rings, put the bottom one on first and then the top one, or vice versa, but I like to put the bottom one on first. But it's easiest if you get this ring on there first, and then these can slide into place. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is ensure that the cylinder head, or the top of the cylinder, is flat by decking the head with a glass plate and a piece of sandpaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a figure 8 pattern, and I'll show you the results so you can see if the cylinder is flat or not. So we just do a few passes in a figure 8 pattern. And it's actually pretty flat. There's no high spots or low spots, but we'll just go a little bit more to make sure. The head is usually the one that warps, and you want to make sure that that's flat. So I'm going to keep going and just get it a little bit flatter. Okay, so now that the cylinder is flat, we're going to go to the head and make sure that that's flat next. All right, so I'm sure it's probably a little bit hard to tell in the video, but there's some spots right here where you can see that the sandpaper touched here, but it didn't touch here, didn't touch here, and it didn't touch down here. So what that means is that the cylinder's a little bit warped, which is pretty common down here in Florida. The heat tends to warp the heads, so and the bikes are mostly running in sand, so the heads get hot and they warp a little bit. So it's always a good idea to deck them and try and get them flat. You don't want to use a regular piece of sandpaper and just sand it down, because it won't be flat. You got to use something flat like a piece of glass or marble and take the sandpaper down. I either use 400 or 600 sand grit or sandpaper, and it helps to make sure that when we put this all back together that it seals real nice. So I'll keep going and make sure that it's flat. Okay, so the cylinder head is flat now, so we can go to installing our cylinder and then our head and cams and all that. So I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is put our base gasket on and make sure that our dowel pins are both in and all the way down so that our cylinder will sit down there flat. So it's going to be hard for me to show you this, but when we're putting the cylinder on, we want to make sure that we don't bend any of these rings, especially the oiling rings down here. They're real easy to catch and kind of bend down over the piston. So we want to make sure that we go real slow and get the cylinder on there correctly without bending any of those rings, because that'll cause us some serious problems. So, all right, here we go. Also, it helps to oil up the inside of the cylinder so everything slides on a little bit smoother. You don't have to do that, but it definitely helps. And then I use a flathead screwdriver to kind of push in the rings as I'm working this cylinder down. All right, so now that we got the cylinder on, we're gonna install the other cam chain guide over on this side, pull the cam chain out, and then we can install the head and the head gasket, and then we'll move to the cam. All right, so we'll put our dowel pins in here, make sure they go all the way down. And next, we're going to get a magnet and pull out our cam chain. All right. Then, going to slide the cam chain guide into place, making sure that it goes down into the groove here. And then after that, take our head gasket, feed it through there, and then run it down onto the dowel pins, just like that. All right, next we're going to grab our head. So now we're going to install our cylinder head bolts. I always put a little bit of assembly lube on the actual threads, and that helps them to not seize up. So we're going to do that before we put them in. Next, we're going to tighten down our cylinder head bolts, and these go to 44 foot-pounds, and you want to do a cross pattern. So you're going to start on one, go across to the other one, down to the other one, and across. Just do a crisscross pattern to tighten them down. Okay, so now we grab our torque wrench and we're going to do 44 foot-pounds. I always go in the cross pattern, like I said, but I don't fully torque each one. I tighten them down slowly until I get to the torque, and then once they're all at 44, we're good. All right, 44 foot. Okay, so now we're gonna set the cylinder at top dead center, and I know you're not gonna probably be able to see it, in the camera, but there is a line in there and a line on the case that's on your stator that is going to line up with the lines on the cases. So we're going to turn the motor over until we get it to line up. All right, I think this is going to be your best shot. I don't know if that camera's even focused, but there is a line in there and it is lined up with the two marks on the case. So we're at top dead center. So now we're going to do our cam. Okay, so this is how we're going to set our timing. This is the dot on the exhaust cam that's going to face towards the front of the bike, and it's going to line up flat with the top of our cam plate here. So we're going to have it like that, and then as long as the motor's on top dead center, we're going to line up the cam and the front of that. Right there, we should be good, and now we'll do the intake cam. Where's my dot? There it is. Okay. Okay, so now as you can see, the dot is lined up with the top of the cam plate on both sides, so we should be good right there. Now to put our cam plate back on. Okay, so I forgot to mention this too. These are your cam bearing keepers, so they're going to go into the head right here and hold your bearing from being able to slide back this way. So you want to put those in. I already did the intake one, now I'm getting ready to do the exhaust one. Okay, so next we're going to torque down the cam plate, and if you can see, it gives you little numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's the pattern that you go in, and these are only, it's 89 inch-pounds or 7 foot-pounds, so it's not a lot of torque on the top of this cam plate. So that's what we're going to do now. Okay, so now that that's done, the next thing we're going to do is install our cam chain tensioner. And this one has a spring, whoop, and a plunger. So we're going to install this first on there, and then after that we're going to put this in and tighten down the bolt, and that'll put tension on our cam chain. All right, so now we can install our valve cover, and after that we're going to just reassemble the bike and you should be all set to go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect the throttle body and tighten up our bottom clamp right there. And you want to make sure, I know it's dark in there, but you want to make sure that this little tab is lined up with your intake boot right there. So we're going to tighten that up. It's a 3mm Allen wrench, so we'll tighten that up next. Okay, now that the top end is all back together and hooked up, our throttle body's hooked up, now we just have to put the subframe, the exhaust on, and reconnect your starter solenoid and your battery, and everything should be done. So if there's any questions you have, anything I missed or didn't cover that you have questions on, leave it in the comments and I'll be checking those, and I'll hopefully be able to answer your question. But Hope that helped. Everybody have fun, ride safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.